Welcome to New Ways, New Habits podcast, hosted by change behaviour experts T3 and Kiddy Partners.
And if you don't know who we are, we offer leadership and behavioural change products and services to multinational companies, large public sector organisations and SMEs within the UK and globally.
Hi, welcome to our podcast on the Collective Advantage, group coaching solutions for organisational success. I'm Eleanor, the account manager at T3 and Kiddy Partners.
I'm Daniel. I'm a consultant at T3 and Kiddy Partners, and I work with Facet 5, which I'll be talking about on this podcast, to help individuals and teams understand how they can get more out of their strengths and manage their risks.
So today we're going to be talking about our latest research from our ebook, The Collective Advantage, specifically looking at personality profiling for dynamic group coaching. So Daniel, let's start with the basics. What is personality profiling and what part can it play in group and team coaching?
Yeah, good question. So let's talk about the personality profiling part of that first. People think of all kinds of things when you talk about personality profiling, but specifically what we're talking about here is understanding or getting a good understanding of your strengths and risks. So, and using a personality profiling approach allows you to understand your trait profile. So, personality is traditionally measured commonly in five traits, and once you understand what your scores are on each of the traits in relation to most other people, you can start to understand your strengths in various areas of workplace behavior. So that's really what we're talking about. And then it allows you to be more consciously aware of what you'll be really great at, but also what the risks that you need to manage.
So how does that apply to a team? What would the benefits be of understanding your specific personality traits and how that plays back into a team scenario?
Into a team, yeah. So well, I mean, a team only works well if people are aware and conscious of each other's preferences, drivers, motivations, and all of that kind of thing. So, what it does, it creates a common language to talk about people's behavior generally. So, for example, using the facet 5 approach, if we take a factor like will generally govern how uh, people like to make decisions, form their opinions, and present their opinions. So, if I get an idea and understanding in a team of the fact that some people are quite outspoken and therefore fairly opinionated, rather than other people who might like to listen a lot more before they make their own mind up, if I understand everyone's preferences in that regard, it means that we can be more respectful of each other's ways of behaving as a team. So hopefully, the idea is that the team is more successful and runs more like a well-oiled machine once everybody knows those differences. So that's just one example of how it might contribute to overall team interaction and dynamics.
So talking about personality profiling, could you give us a kind of a brief understanding of exactly what facet 5 is and what the 5 factors that you've mentioned before are?
Yeah, absolutely. So personality tools usually comprise measuring 5 traits, so 5 areas of behavior. Facet 5 is one of those, and it's the one that we use as a preference with quite a lot of our clients in coaching, team development, and so on. So the 5 areas represented in Facet 5 are, the first one is will. Will is your approach to making decisions and setting goals, for example. Energy is the second factor, and that governs how you engage and consult with other people. So whether you're a more social kind of person or whether you prefer to be sort of more solitary in terms of how you work. Affection governs overall your levels of people versus task orientation, which is a common way of looking at someone's style. Um, Control is your approach to your working style, so how you like to set your own commitments and your overall levels of responsibility and conscientiousness towards what you do. And then finally, the really important aspect is emotionality. Emotionality is your general levels of emotional responsiveness to things like pressure, critical events, taking feedback. and also it represents things like your levels of caution and your levels of apprehension as well. So if you add all of those up, you've got quite a range of behaviors that you get insight about if you use personality approaches prior to looking at team coaching and group interactions. So it's quite a comprehensive way of understanding what you've got to work with, basically.
Yeah, and I find it really interesting that especially the emotionality, I can see that mine plays up when I'm feeling more stressed or, and in a group dynamic, in a team, if you are aware of those things, it definitely helps you being able to communicate with somebody better to explain kind of how you're feeling at the time, or you might just be more self-aware of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really great example because if you imagine I'm with a group of people that I may not have worked with a lot, so I might not have that experience of their levels of emotionality, for example. What Facet 5 can do is it can help you understand very quickly the nature of the people in the room. It doesn't mean that that's exactly how they will behave, but it gives you a really good overview of, yes, who are the people in the room who are likely to be more expressive or perhaps more emotionally responsive? Who are the people who will sit back and
Mm.
think a lot more? Who are the people who will be quite outspoken and forthright, and so on and so on? And it almost serves as a way to get underneath the skin of that really quickly, particularly if you're somebody who is running a session. So I facilitate an awful lot of sessions and I run group coaching with quite a few of our clients. And the insight you can get as a facilitator beforehand by looking at everybody's profiles really helps you understand whose opinions am I going to need to draw out a bit more,
Mm.
who are going to be the people who might perhaps be the better listeners, who are going to ask the most insightful questions and be more challenging. So it is a really useful. It's almost like a map or a
Mm.
blueprint of the people in the room, and that's really valuable.
So when you're facilitating, team or group coaching, what are some of the challenges that can come up when you've got different personality types?
Yeah, it's a really good one. So there's the obvious energy split
Mm.
that you get. The one that most people are aware of is whether you have a more extroverted or a more introverted tendency. That's a natural challenge in managing input from others. So you have to be aware that obviously your extroverts will seek to fill a silence, but silences can actually be quite valuable, and you need to allow the silence to breathe, and allow the more introverted, thoughtful kinds of people to have their say as well. So that's an example of a kind of when you've got a polarized preferences in the room, you also need to work harder to draw out thoughts from some people more than others. You'd look at like I mentioned earlier, the will preference will be people who have strong views versus people who like to sit back and perhaps think about it, or people who are just more easygoing and less opinionated. So there are lots of different dynamics that come out in the data which are quite which can flag it and create a really interesting session, because let's face it, they'd be quite um, one tracked and fairly or less interesting if everyone had
Mm.
or very similar traits, or you'd be managing something like that in a very different way. So the variety is really important.
And I guess it's probably important for a team to have different personalities. As you say, you probably don't want everyone to be on the same track because you
Right.
want some challenge there to encourage different perspectives. Is that something
Yeah,
that's useful, or is that a good outcome?
yeah. No, well, good
Mm.
coaching's about challenge, right? Coaching is when you're in a group coaching scenario, you want to support, but you also want to challenge, and you want to do those in balance depending on what environment you want to create. So the levels of challenge coming from some people could be in their how direct they are. So if you think about thinking about the affection factor, people who are lower affection tend to be more direct and straightforward in how they express themselves. People who are higher affection often like to explore more and give more opportunities. So they're ideal for being expansive and talking about possibility, whereas lower affection people are a little bit more task focused and like to narrow things down a bit. And you can balance that really well, but it can be a challenge if you've got people who are low affection getting sort of fidgety because there's too much kind of talk about what if and can we just find something to do. It's interesting. So yeah, that does, and that creates a good dynamic having that
And
variety.
in group coaching, is there opportunity for team members to work together, or do they all work as a complete team? How do you support and challenge the whole group?
Yeah, it really depends on the aim of the session. So if you've got a group who are all pursuing the same outcome or the same goal, let's say, then there's a chance there to make the make the most of the differences in the room and um, perhaps put unlikely pairings together and allow them to perhaps discuss. But if you're working with a group of people overall, you and you've got one individual. So if you've got the group perspective and a group goal, or the other situation is if you've got one person with their peers working on their own challenge, but their peers are helping them work through that challenge. Again, um, making use of the differences is something that will be really important. So, when do you open up and be more, um, let's say, blue sky about the ideas, and then equally, what might you do if you had to do one specific thing next, which is a great coaching question. Um, Getting people to be more focused. So um, it does work really well to have that difference of that cognitive difference between people, which is really important.
I would think that in the workplace, people don't get that opportunity normally to have those sorts of conversations. So the fact that they can bond with each other, it probably supports the relationship aspect of a team. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, very fair. We recently ran an offsite for one of our clients where and we were asked specifically to give them a group coaching experience and taking the emphasis off the facet 5 element and just thinking about the process doesn't happen in the workplace unless you force it. So, and people at a senior level don't generally tend to get together for purposes other than being really task focused. And if you're really task focused, you're short on time and you've got an outcome to achieve. And so the discipline there will be on kind of working towards the solution. The group coaching basically slows everything down a bit and it allows breathing space for ideas, for challenges, which, unless you're a really disciplined senior leadership group, you wouldn't naturally do it, or I doubt you would. So this is a discipline we were trying to instill in this client. Um, Giving them that reflective practice, I guess it is. It's we don't reflective practice takes time, and time is the one thing people always say they never have enough of. So that's the bit that you're getting the most from with group coaching. The other thing is, of course, that their group coaching is generally facilitated. So that requires a neutral person in the room or somebody who doesn't have a vested interest to kind of conduct that orchestra, as it were. So that's the other thing that you um, kind of need to bear in mind. So yeah, going back to the example, the process we took to this client for their offsite, they found hugely beneficial. But the question is, how do you replicate that when you go back to your day to day, and then you get flooded with emails and all the other things that slow us down?
Yeah, and that I bet a lot of people can resonate with that. Um, and I guess then facet 5 really comes in handy then because you've got your personality profile, which you can kind of revert back to. And if you've been in a team scenario where you've been using that profiling tool, because I know in facet 5 they have Teamscape, which is specifically designed for team or group coaching. so they can then go back into their workplace and almost play back into it and hopefully have those conversations and use that sort of language, would you say?
Yeah, completely. Do you know what the best outcome that I like to hear about is where teams use their profiles when they're meeting beyond the day that I sort of hold, the day that I'm with them for. So, of all the senior leadership team meetings I've run using Teamscape and Facet 5, um, dropping back in and actually learning that people are still using it that's the best outcome. And you're absolutely right. The language is important because, to use a really simple example, which I was talking about the other week, um, I've got people who I work with that I'd really love to be able to express um, qualities about them that perhaps are harder to work with. It might be, so let's take a low control colleague, for example, which would be me. The way in which you go about doing your work when you're low control is very different to how you go about doing it when you're high control. Um, and the high control individual will desperately want to tell the low control person that they appear chaotic, disorganized, and all over the place. But I can't really say that without upsetting someone. So once I get the language, I can talk about it in those. I can talk about it safely in those terms, and it neutralizes this takes a sting out of it. So um, that's a really helpful part of the process as well. So going back to your question about teams using it and taking it forward, you've got that language and you can laugh about it almost and talk about, okay, so you want to rush to make a decision right now, but we're not going to. We're actually going to discuss this for a lot longer, and then that allows people to be really aware of their own challenges. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I've got quite high energy, so
Right.
I
And what does that mean? How do you understand that? What do you see that as being a strength for you?
a strength, I would say, I mean, I can be quite expressive, but I can bring a lot of energy into a team and almost probably encourage people to have more of a conversation because I'm quite a talker. But I do
Hmm.
have to warn people that I have a tendency to interrupt. So I also do have to be aware of that. Um, but I will ask the questions. I will, start a conversation. I have no problem with that. Whereas
Mm.
I've experienced in teams where other people don't always feel that they have a voice. Um, so I'd like to think that a person with a lot of energy might encourage other people. However, it could probably also close them down. So you have to just be
Right.
aware enough. And I did find that Facet 5 helped me understand that
Yeah.
better.
That's fantastic. Yeah, you answered your own question there. I think being aware of that in both positive and as risks is important. Yeah, absolutely. You will encourage engagement and conversation in the room, but the being aware that you might talk over people that's the risk element
Mm,
of having higher energy. I've partially had the same challenge, and the more you learn about it, the more you learn to manage it and give the quieter folk a bit more of a chance to think about things before they input. And that's great, because what you're talking about there is that's the impact that your profiles had on you. So knowing about your preferences, you take that into meetings now
mm,
with that awareness, and it helps you manage it. Yeah, and likewise with me, like I mentioned about being low control earlier, I'm really super conscious of how that impacts others, particularly people who are trying to get things done and organize things. So um, that having that illuminator to start with allows you to sort of hold on to it. So yeah, no, that's good to hear that.
It also helps you recognize pace of people. And I think when
Right.
you're working in a team, everybody has different working styles, different paces, and you kind of have to end up matching somebody that you're talking to at times, or you might also need to bring them up or slow them down. So that's quite helpful as well. And I think that using a personality profiling tool or having insight into somebody else's, because if you're working in a team you might share your profiles with one another, And that can, going back to having a conversation starter or be giving you safe language to use, that's really helpful, because you can almost look at their profile and say, oh, okay, this is how they might lead, or this is how they might communicate. And that can be a really helpful part of that tool, I found personally.
Yeah, and you can either play up to it and use it as an advantage, or you can be really aware of it and control it. So, for example, if I'm running a session with an intact team and I'm coaching them, I might deliberately focus my attention on the less likely suspects, or the people that perhaps aren't likely to contribute unless I invite them to, and play with it a bit, because
Hmm.
it's like the kid in the class that's always putting their hand up and that always gets picked. Eventually the teacher will say, right, can I have someone other than Daniel or Eleanor to answer the question? um, it allows you to be able to do that and to get different perspectives going on as well. So it's yeah, it's really useful in that sense.
So, Daniel, in the ebook, you write a little bit about the understanding others phase. So, can you explain exactly what that is, and why is it such a critical part of team coaching itself?
Right. So yeah, that's a really good question. When you're team coaching, you want everyone to be at their best. And if I know the people I'm in the group with, then that's slightly easier because I'm aware of their differences. When you're on a leadership program, for example, it can really help speed up the process of forming, storming, and norming, by understanding the profiles in the room. So it kind of catalyzes that element, if people can be brought together and be on the same page more quickly. So, in terms of understanding others, it's a way to assist that process so that the team can perform at its best, whether it is an intact team or whether it's a disparate team of leaders on a leadership development program.
So, I guess if we didn't understand each other, you wouldn't really have a high performing team.
Well, no, I mean we would, if we didn't understand each other, we'd need to take a lot of time in order to get to that point. So if you think of some of the best teams that you've worked in, that you've got to know over a period of months and years, we haven't always got the luxury of that time. And so being able to have a very quick insight into what people are like, that will, like I say, that will speed up that process and allow everyone to be at their best. Absolutely. Hence the collective advantage.
Thank you so much, Daniel. It's been really interesting chatting with you today. And it's definitely helped me be more self-aware of some of the language I might use within
Mhm.
teams to create that kind of safe space for them to discuss their insights with me, and me to share my insights on my personality. Um, yeah, and kind of what the benefits and challenges of group coaching is, and what it can bring, and how it can make you a more successful team. So thank you so much for that.
You're welcome. It's been fun to talk about it.
So, if you'd like to find out a bit more about group or team coaching, you can download our ebook, The Collective Advantage Group Solutions for Organisational Success.
So thank you for listening to our podcast, New Ways, New Habits.
To find out future release dates, follow us on LinkedIn, and you can find all future podcasts on Spotify, SoundCloud, and Apple. We really are the whole package.
And it wouldn't be right without saying, don't forget to provoke, plant and practice these new ways and new habits.